In the summer of my junior year, our school arranged a field trip to a supposedly haunted, abandoned amusement park just outside town. The park had been closed for decades after a series of tragic accidents. Our history teacher thought it would be a unique way to learn about local history and urban legends. As we entered, the air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. Old rides stood silent and motionless, covered in vines and graffiti. We split into smaller groups to explore different parts of the park. My friends and I decided to check out the old funhouse, which was said to be the epicenter of the park's hauntings. The funhouse was dark and cold, despite the summer heat outside. As we walked through the twisting corridors of mirrors, we began to hear strange noises, whispers, footsteps, and the distant sound of children laughing. We thought it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us, but the sounds grew louder and more distinct. Suddenly, one of the mirrors cracked, and we saw a shadowy figure behind us. We turned around, but there was no one there. The temperature dropped further, and the laughter turned into cries of pain. We tried to find our way out, but the corridors seemed to shift and change, trapping us inside. In our panic, we stumbled upon an old maintenance room. Inside, we found newspaper clippings and photographs detailing the park's accidents and the deaths of several children. The realization that these were the ghosts haunting the park sent chills down our spines. Just as we were about to leave, the door slammed shut and the lights flickered. We saw the ghostly figures of the children appear before us, their faces twisted in pain and sorrow. They reached out to us, and we felt a cold, suffocating pressure around us. We screamed for help, and our teacher, hearing our cries, managed to find us and open the door. We rushed out, gasping for breath and shaken to our core. The rest of the class gathered outside, their faces pale with fear as we recounted our experience. The field trip was cut short, and we returned to school. The memory of the funhouse, the ghostly children, and the shifting corridors haunted us for months. The abandoned amusement park, once a place of fun and laughter, had become a site of nightmares. Our senior biology class went on a camping trip to a dense forest known for its biodiversity. We were excited to spend the weekend studying plants and animals in their natural habitat. The forest, however, had a reputation for being haunted, with numerous reports of people going missing or experiencing strange phenomena. The first day went smoothly. We hiked, collected samples, and documented our findings. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and enjoying the sounds of the forest. Around midnight, our teacher warned us not to wander off alone, as the forest could be dangerous at night. Despite the warning, my friend James decided to go for a walk to clear his head. He promised to stay close to the camp, but after an hour, he still hadn't returned. Worried, a few of us decided to look for him. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the dark forest, calling his name. As we searched, we began to hear strange noises, branches snapping, whispering voices, and footsteps that seemed to follow us. The forest, which had felt alive and vibrant during the day, now seemed malevolent and oppressive. We stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin deep in the woods. Inside the cabin, we found signs of recent activity: an old, rusted bed frame, a broken mirror, and what looked like fresh footprints in the dust. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and our flashlights flickered. We saw shadowy figures moving in the corners of the room, their eyes glowing in the darkness. One of the figures stepped forward, and we recognized it as James. His eyes were vacant, and he moved as if in a trance. He began to speak in a strange guttural voice, warning us to leave the forest before it claimed us all. We tried to snap him out of it, but he was unresponsive. In a panic, we broke down the door and dragged James out of the cabin. As we ran back to camp, the shadowy figures followed us, their whispers growing louder and more menacing. We reached the camp, breathless and terrified, and our teacher immediately called for help. The authorities arrived and conducted a search of the forest and the cabin, but found no trace of the shadowy figures. James gradually returned to normal, but he had no memory of what happened. The rest of the trip was canceled, and we returned home, haunted by the events of that night, the memory of the shadowy figures, the oppressive atmosphere of the forest, and James's eerie transformation stayed with us. The once beautiful forest had become a place of fear and darkness, a reminder of the unknown horrors that lurk in the shadows. During my junior year of college, our archaeology class went on a field trip to a small, uninhabited island rumored to be cursed. The island was known for its ancient ruins and mysterious artifacts. Our professor thought it would be an excellent opportunity to study the island's history and artifacts firsthand. The island was beautiful but eerie. As we set up camp and began exploring, we found old stone structures and strange carvings that hinted at a long-lost civilization. Our professor warned us to be respectful of the artifacts and the island's history. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire to discuss our findings. One of my classmates, Lisa, mentioned feeling a strange presence watching us. We dismissed it as nerves, but as the night wore on, we began to hear unsettling noises, footsteps, whispers, and the distant sound of drums. Around midnight, Lisa disappeared. We searched the camp and surrounding area, but found no sign of her. In a panic, we called out her name and scoured the island with flashlights. As we searched, we stumbled upon an ancient altar deep in the forest. The altar was covered in strange symbols and surrounded by stone statues of menacing figures. Suddenly, we saw Lisa standing in front of the altar, her eyes closed and her body swaying as if in a trance. She began to speak in an unknown language, her voice echoing through the trees. As we approached, the statues seemed to come to life, their eyes glowing and their stone faces contorting into expressions of rage. We tried to reach Lisa, but an invisible force pushed us back. The drums grew louder, and the ground beneath us began to tremble. In a desperate attempt, our professor recited a cleansing ritual he had read about in an old text. The air around us grew colder, and the statues froze in place. Lisa collapsed, and we managed to pull her away from the altar. The island fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We returned to camp and decided to leave the island at first light. Lisa gradually regained consciousness, but had no memory of what happened. The experience left us all deeply shaken, and we couldn't wait to leave the cursed island behind. The field trip, which had started as an exciting archaeological expedition, turned into a nightmare. The memory of the ancient altar, the menacing statues, and Lisa's eerie transformation haunted us. The island, once a place of historical curiosity, had revealed its dark and terrifying secrets. During my senior year of high school, our psychology class went on a field trip to an old, abandoned asylum that had been converted into a museum. The asylum was infamous for its dark history and supposed hauntings. Our teacher thought it would be a unique way to learn about the history of mental health treatment. The asylum was cold and foreboding. As we toured the building, we saw old patient rooms, rusty medical equipment, and faded photographs of former patients. Our guide told us stories of mistreatment, mysterious deaths, and ghost sightings. In the basement, we found an old, locked door that the guide said led to the isolation cells. He warned us not to go near it, as it was said to be the most haunted part of the asylum. Despite his warning, a few of us decided to explore it during our free time. We managed to pick the lock and entered the dark, narrow corridor. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. As we walked, we heard whispers and saw shadowy figures moving in the darkness. The isolation cells were small and claustrophobic, with scratch marks on the walls and floor. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, and our flashlights flickered. We saw ghostly figures of former patients, their faces twisted in agony and rage. They moved towards us, reaching out with skeletal hands. We tried to run, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. In our panic, we stumbled upon an old, forgotten room. Inside, we found a journal belonging to a former doctor who had conducted cruel experiments on the patients. The journal detailed horrific treatments and the eventual revolt of the patients, leading to the doctor's death. Just as we were about to leave, the ghost of the doctor appeared, his face contorted with anger and guilt. He screamed at us to leave, and the room grew cold and dark. The ghostly patients surrounded us, their faces filled with sorrow and pain. We managed to break down the door and escape the basement. Our teacher and guide found us, terrified and disheveled, and immediately ended the tour. We left the asylum, haunted by the ghostly encounters and the dark history we had uncovered. The field trip, which was supposed to be an educational experience, turned into a nightmare. The memory of the isolation cells, the ghostly patients, and the vengeful doctor haunted us. The asylum, once a place of historical interest, had become a site of terror and darkness.